Okay, today's sponsor is 2 Peter 1:2. This is how she wanted to have her sponsorship. It's actually Leanne Ridgely, who's our sponsor. She can't be here today, but we want to thank her for that. 2 Peter 1:2 is grace and peace be yours in abundance through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. So, as you know, the luncheons are the second Tuesday of every month. We don't charge for lunch, but we would really appreciate your donation for lunch if you would do that. There's bowls on the table. Also, sponsorships are available. It's $150 to sponsor luncheon, and we would appreciate that. Our future speakers next month is a good friend, Harold Merkel, who will be really good speaker. And in September, Brenda Pennington. Brenda will also be, she'll be great. And then in October, Mike Mantell, another great speaker. And then November, for the Veterans Luncheon, Wesley Hunt will be here. As you all know, he's running for Congress. And then in December, we have confirmation that the Concordia Chancel Choir will be here to sing again for us. And they always do such a fabulous job. Let's see, I got a call from Colleen Harrington, who was supposed to be our speaker today on Saturday night. It was late Saturday afternoon. And she said, I've got COVID, I can't be there on Tuesday. And my good buddy Paul Marshall, with no notice at all, agreed to come and speak to us today. You all have heard him before, a lot of you have, and you know he's going to be great today. He has a new book out, just is going to be published Saturday or Sunday, right, Paul? Sunday, his book will be out. So look forward to seeing that book. So Paul, thank you for agreeing to come. So Paul's been a really good friend for many years. We've played tennis together and golf together and leadership on the church. We've been to retreats together and some traveling. His parents were Salvation Army officers serving the migrant workers in the sugarcane and pineapple fields. And this experience has really helped Paul with his faith journey and his deep faith in God. It shaped his whole life. I can attest to that. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, served 3 aircraft carrier tours in Vietnam, flying over 100 combat and combat support missions. He retired from the Navy Reserves in '92 with the rank of captain. His family's life was dramatically changed with the violent murder of his youngest daughter, Wendy, by her fiancé. Paul wrote his recently published book to share the changes he went through from hatred and revenge to finally arriving at forgiveness. Paul and his wife Gigi live in Lakewood Forest and are active in Woodwood Presbyterian Church. Gigi is a great realtor. She has helped us buy and sell several houses over the years, and she's really great. So it's my pleasure to invite Paul to come up and share his story.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that generous introduction. I think some of you have probably seen some of these slides before. I know I did a similar presentation at our men's retreat, so I see a couple of our people that attended that retreat. But as Paul has introduced me, let me run through a little background on my Salvation Army family. But before I tell you a little bit about my father and mother's ministry, because in the Salvation Army, both the husband and wife are ordained ministers. However, my parents expressed their desire to be missionaries in Africa. But because my mother had not gone to the Salvation Army Training College and got her degree in theology, they punished them by sending them to Hawaii. So churches don't always make the right decision. Is that correct, Pat? But anyhow, they ended up in the Hawaiian Islands where myself, my brother, and my sister were born. And here you see a picture of them serving the migrant workers who, as Paul said, were working the sugarcane and pineapple fields. And at this time, it was on the island of Kauai, beautiful island where we were born in Lahui. Shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because Kauai was the westernmost island closest to the Japanese. They sent a battalion of Army officers to protect us. And this is my father serving coffee and donuts to them. An interesting side note, not to criticize the Red Cross, but the Salvation Army was giving away coffee and donuts for free, and the Red Cross was charging a nickel. My dad had a weekly broadcast on the radio where he delivered sermons and testimonials. And of course, we were exposed to all of that growing up in that household. This is my brother and I. He is named after my father and my grandfather. And that's us saying our bedtime prayers when I was about 4 years old. My parents were doing much more than just preaching to the migrant workers because my brother and I were born 11 months apart. This is probably more of the calling that we had rather than going into the ministry as the previous slide shows. This is us channeling our future military careers. My brother ended up, bad choice in my opinion, going to the Air Force Academy and graduating a couple of years before I did at the Naval Academy. This was the Salvation Army Chapel. It seated about 50 people, I guess. And the Army took it over as their headquarters. And in exchange for that, they gave my dad a Woody station wagon, a trailer, and a mess tent with 50 or 60 chairs. And we'd go around the island, and with the help of the migrant workers and the other people in the area, would set up a tent and have revival services. And that was how I spent many of my years growing up in Hawaii. We moved to the Big Island, and these are two scenes that I think kind of exemplify what Hawaii is all about. The one on the left is Kilauea Crater during one of the eruptions in, I think it was 1954. At that time, you weren't restricted. You could walk right up to the lava flow, about from here to that table. We got about that close. And all of a sudden, my mom said, "I smell rubber burning." We looked down and our tennis shoes were melting. But we were too young to know that we had done anything wrong. And the second one is, on the Big Island of Hilo, Hawaii, Hilo is one of the cities there, is the second largest ranch to the King Ranch, called the Parker Ranch. However, there's not a deep water port there. So what they would do is they'd put a halter on the cattle, and they'd hook it up to a horse, and the horse would drag it out to that motor whaleboat. They'd hook it up to the motor whaleboat and take it out to a larger ship that you can see off in the distance, and then take it to be butchered in Honolulu. Oh, went the wrong way. I went to several different schools because my dad, it turned out, was very, very good at raising funds for the Salvation Army. So the Salvation Army would move them around at different locations where they were having trouble getting funds. And we participated for many times in the community chest at that time, which became the United Way. But I understand now the Salvation Army has moved away and refused money from the United Way because they insisted on them teaching other religions than Christianity. Here's me when I was a good-looking young thing that had a flat tummy as a midshipman at the Naval Academy. And a couple of years before my senior year, my wife-to-be, Gigi, in June of 1964 at a ring dance. And this is me as things progressed. As Paul said, I served on 3 different carriers, flying combat and combat support missions. My 3rd carrier was the Coral Sea. And I was flight deck officer, and I led the launch that mined Haiphong Harbor, which was a significant turning point, in my opinion, in the Vietnam War that led the North Vietnamese to the Paris peace talks and eventually ended up that conflict. An interesting side note, it had been suggested to LBJ 10 years earlier that we mined Haiphong Harbor, and he had turned down that offer from the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he thought he would bring the Russians and the Chinese into the conflict. If he had done that, we would have had 50,000 less casualties in the Vietnam conflict, in my opinion. And this is a picture of the Coral Sea with her escort destroyer. And this is me after I left the Navy on active duty. I transferred into the reserves in 1975. And this is some of my civilian work that I did. Somebody once said a committee is something that takes minutes and wastes hours. And this is me as part of our service in the reserves. We erected, you can't make it out, but that's a ship's bell from the USS Houston that they found in the Java Sea where she was sunk. And they sent it to the city of Houston. And this organization found out that the mayor of Houston had it stored in some remote storage location downtown, and we asked to have it resurrected, and then we erected a statue, and it's down in Sam Houston Park right now. I also participated in dinner theaters, and this is one that was held in Lakewood Forest, my subdivision. And I think Gigi was playing Emma Wright, and I was playing I'm a Wrong, which was probably the appropriate title for my work. Things in our life, as Paul said, drastically changed in October of 2013. This is my daughter's house, which unfortunately became a murder scene eventually. I was contacted on Monday of Halloween week, and my daughter said, I got a flat, Dad. And I said, what are you doing? This is the second or third time you've had a flat tire. She said, well, they're re-roofing some of the houses in the neighborhood, and I guess I picked it up. And I said, well, I'll come over and help you change the tire. And she said, no, my friend Colt Morgan's here, and he'd like to talk to you. Colt gets on the phone, and he says, I'd like to marry your daughter. And I said, well, I commend you on your choice. But this is quite a surprise, Colt. We don't know you very well. We'd like to get to know you better. What are your plans? At that time, you didn't have a job. And I said, we need to know what your plans are for your work, what your plans are for your family. We don't know much about you. So we arranged to meet them that Friday. She and I terminated that phone call, and I said, I love you, Wendy. And she said, I love you too, Dad. Those were the last words I heard from my daughter. I love you too, Dad. Pretty nice. My wife called her up on Wednesday and confirmed that we were going to meet on Friday. Friday came, nobody showed up. Saturday, I decided to go over to the house, only to get over there and found out I had the wrong key and couldn't get in. Came back Sunday with the help of her best friend who lived around the corner and to the house, and immediately knew something was wrong. Her two dogs, which were pet adopted, she actually spent a couple $100 having them spayed when she was drawing unemployment. Hadn't been fed, there was no water in their bowls. That wouldn't have been my daughter Wendy. She loved those dogs as if they were own children. Books were laid out in her room. There was some evidence of new painting on the wall. The sheetrock to the master bedroom had been penetrated with a doorknob. So I filed a missing persons report. Her car was still in the garage. Her purse was there with her phone. And when I applied for a missing persons appointment with the constables, they said, you know, Paul, your daughter's in her early 40s. Her boyfriend was in young 30s. There's not going to be much in the way of law enforcement to look for a missing person at your daughter's age. I, up to that point in time, had thought they had eloped. As it turned out, on that Monday, I was contacted by the constables, and they said, Paul, we don't have the equipment in the constable's department to handle this type of case. We think it's a homicide. And I didn't think much about it at the time. I still had this hope that Wendy would somehow or another show up. As it turned out, she had gotten into a fight with Colt. He had stabbed her to death, put her in the bathtub and let her bleed out, and then fed her body into the fireplace, trying to destroy all the physical evidence so he could exonerate himself of what had occurred. I'm not sure how all of this impacted me at the time. I was too busy trying to figure out what had happened to Wendy. I also looked into some of her finances, and it was apparent that she had been supporting Colt for a while. So I was dealing with a bunch of credit card companies, and I got a whole variety of different responses. Some of them had seen the coverage of this tragedy on the local news channel and just said, forget it, we'll just write it off. Others said that I pay them. And I said, well, I suggest you send a letter to Wendy. I'm not sure I know what golden street she's in heaven, but I'm not sure you can get a letter to her. Any case, it was all resolved, as well as several other issues, but it became evident that she was no longer with us. This is a little... I'm going to close with the final conversation I had with my lovely daughter, Wendy. It was Monday, the 28th of October. And it was about 10:30 in the morning. She knows I play men's doubles every Monday morning, so she always waited, and she said, Dad, I got a flat tire. And I said, kind of chastised her. It was second flat tire she's had in a couple of weeks. I said, you driving through construction sites, or what the heck are you doing? Get 2 flat tires. I said, you want me to come over and change it? And she said, no, Colt is here. And I said, oh, is he going to change it? And she said, sure. And he said, I also have a surprise for you. He's asked me to marry him. And I said, have you accepted? And she said, yeah. I said, do you love him? She said, yes, sir, I do. I said, we don't know him very well, Wendy. You need to come and talk with your mom and about Colt. We'd like to know him more. But if you love him, I assure you we'll grow to love him too. And I think you ought to congratulate him on making such a smart choice to choose you as a loving bride. And then I said, I love you, Wendy. And she said, I love you too, Daddy. The last words, I love you too, Daddy. How great to have those. It's the last words that I have in my head. I love you, Wendy. Your mom loves you, Wendy. Your sister loves you, Wendy. Andrew loves you, Wendy. Your family and friends love you, Wendy. And Jesus loves you, Wendy. Good gracious, I don't have to tell you that. You're walking around getting us a praiser. I know what you're doing. I don't think my mom's going to like that color scheme. We need to move some of this furniture around. So Wendy Gale Marshall, enjoy eternity. We'll be there with you soon. Next thing that happened was there was so little remains of Wendy that we had an interment, and Pat officiated, I think. But to give you an example, an interment is where the cremains are put in the columbarium, and we happen to have one of those at Wynwood Presbyterian Church. Normally, cremains would fill a funeral urn about this size. Cremains of a human body are usually 6 to 7 pounds, depending on the weight of the individual. This is what was delivered to us by Magnet Funeral Home in Magnolia as what was left of my daughter, Wendy. So it was obvious we didn't need an urn like that. Wendy was a traveler. She loved to travel. While she was in Thailand, she brought a little jewelry case, and we took that jewelry case and put her remains in that jewelry case and then stuck it in the columbarium. You'll see some of the service.
This is your opportunity to come forward. If you have mementos that you would like to place in the niche.
Ready? All right, let's do it for Wendy. 1, 2, 3.
We were told that one of these balloons with a note on the top of it actually ended up in the Lufkin area, which is what, 150 miles away. Next, you're going to catch a scene. During the course of all this, my daughter was on Facebook, and somewhere on the Discovery Channel got a hold of her and wanted to know if they could come and do a documentary on this event. And so they came out, but before that is a scene in Buffalo, Texas, where Colt had escaped and was terrorizing the neighborhood. And one of the policemen, as a result of Tiffany Craig on Channel 11's interview with me, kind of resurrected the case. It had been about 6 weeks, and the case had gone cold and all the leads had dried up. So you'll see him, Colt Morgan, with the law officer from the police department in Buffalo in the first scene, and then the Discovery Channel, the end of the series on the Discovery Channel.
I'm not.
Then, nearly 6 weeks after Wendy is presumed murdered, a hotel maintenance worker in Buffalo arrives for what he expects to be a normal workday.
Adrian Vargas was going to the maintenance shed behind the hotel.
He noticed someone was sleeping in the shed. He immediately recognized him as Colt Morgan.
After 2 weeks of searching for fugitive Colt Morgan, a Buffalo, Texas maintenance worker has just made an alarming discovery.
There were numerous flyers, numerous posters all in and around the Palestine, Buffalo, and Leon County area. The maintenance worker did a great job of immediately recognizing who the person was that was sleeping inside this shed, immediately went to notify police that Colt Morgan was there.
Where is he? Stay here. Officers in pursuit, officers in pursuit.
They saw him and they started chasing him.
Officers in pursuit, officers in pursuit.
I heard it over the radio, so that's when I headed up over there. Game on.
Colt, stop! Get on your knees!
Knowing person that killed somebody, I come out with my gun drawn, telling him, you better get on the ground.
On the ground! Don't make me kill you.
He looked like he was whooped. I mean, he was tired.
Colt Morgan, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law.
Very proud woman. You know, I mean, that's something that, hey, yo, we got you.
I think Wendy was a very, very good friend. She was a friend to everybody that wanted to be friends with her. And I think she'll be remembered for her kindness. I think if I hadn't had a strong faith, it would have been much, much more difficult. There's a peace and a little bit of joy in my heart that I know at some point in time I'm going to be reunited with my daughter. It's kind of interesting, this is where Colt's home was after he was apprehended in Buffalo, Texas. They didn't have a jail cell in Buffalo, so they took him to Palestine and put him in a cell there. And the lead detective who you saw, Michael Ritchie, in one of the previous slides said, I'm going to call you up, Paul, and I want you to hear me slapping the handcuffs on him. At that time, I was driving from here to Atlanta to give my daughter Wendy's car to my sister-in-law. And she was flying down from the D.C. area. So I was just about to get into the outskirts of Atlanta, and it was crowded as heck. And so I missed his call. So as soon as I could, I pulled over to the side of the road. And I called him back, and he says, oh, I'm so upset that you weren't there to hear me put the handcuffs on Colt. And I says, Michael, just take them off and slam them back on again. I thought that was a pretty good solution. Anyhow, this is Colt's home, Harris County Jail, for 2+ years. So justice is certainly not swift anywhere in our country. But I will say it's fair, at least in my experience. I had an opportunity to review the forensic data that the medical examiners have provided for us. I knew my wife and my daughter and her friends couldn't handle it because it made me nauseous just reading it. And the minute descriptions of the damages that had been done to my daughter. So we ended up taking Colt for a plea bargain of 40 years. The maximum sentence he could have gotten, the death penalty was off the table, is my understanding of how the law works in Texas. So the maximum I think I could have gotten if we had gone to trial was 50 years, and it just wasn't worth it for the disruption it would have caused my family. So we ended up with a settlement of 40 years, and here is the courtroom. Jan Crocker was our judge, and she was excellent. She gave us an opportunity during the plea bargain discussions with his lawyer to address Colt directly. I was still very, very upset and revengeful. And I said, you butchering, murdering bastard. I hope you die now. Gigi got up with a totally different approach. She told him how much we loved Wendy. and how much he would have been loved if he had stayed in our family or joined our family. He never looked at me. He couldn't keep his eyes off teaching. I guess as a result of that, there was a period of time where I had nothing but revenge and hatred. I didn't think that I deserved this. Why me, God? Similar questions that most of us in this room will ask when we're going through a tragedy. But it ended up where he accepted a 40-year sentence. And this is his home for the next 40 years. There was a period of time when I would get reports on how he was behaving as a prisoner. And finally, about 3 years ago, I said, I don't need to hear this anymore. I think God has called me to move forward, to go through steps to achieve forgiveness for what Colt has done to our family. So this is a picture of her when she was 4. This is a picture of her at one of my niece's weddings. I finally came to the conclusion that the only way I could get the monkey off my back was to forgive him. But that's not easy. It's a complex process, and everybody approaches it at their own pace. My wife is still not quite at the same place I am. My daughter is probably about the same place I am. But as I say in the statement here, sometimes I felt like I was moving forward fast, and other times I couldn't figure out why I was stuck in the mud. It's a combination of steps, moving from wanting revenge and hatred, questioning God and the world, and finally recognize that the world is an evil place, but is still in control. Moving on to the rationalization that without forgiveness, the tragedy will continue to control you in some way forever. We find forgiveness inside our hearts and minds. What happens to the people we forgive depends on them. Waiting for somebody to repent before we forgive them is to surrender our future to the person who wronged us. We do not excuse the person we forgive. We blame the person we forgive. And finally, forgiving is not forgetting. The scars will never be removed, but we learn to live with them. That completes my presentation. I'm certainly willing to answer any questions that anybody might have. And don't be hesitant to ask me anything that I think maybe I can answer. Not that we have ever determined. I think he was afraid to meet the family. We had invited him over. She had known him as an acquaintance. They had worked together at Norris Seal, which is a seal company that does high-pressure seals, I think, Brett. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not. And she was running contracts, and he was in quality control or something. But, you know, we never got close to him, and he moved away. And we were very surprised when he had moved back in. My personal opinion is there was some evidence that there was drug use by him. He had just served a 6-month sentence over in the San Antonio area for DWI. And apparently hadn't cleaned up his act as a result of that. We chose to serve 6 months rather than paying a $2,500 fine for DWI. I'm not sure we've ever got a clear reason as to why he had it. I think he was in a drug-induced state and didn't know what he was doing. He claimed she attacked him with a knife and he had to defend himself. The homicide detectives looked at an injury that he had on his hand, and it was not a defensive wound. It was an offensive wound from a stabbing motion. And anyhow, I've asked myself that question and finally I've decided I ought to move on. It's not going to change the outcome. It's not going to change how I feel about the situation. I don't think there would ever be an explanation that would be satisfactory for me as a parent as to why he would choose to do that. So, I do. When Michael Ritchie and his accompanying police picked her up at Palestine, this is kind of funny. As you saw in that last scene, Colt hadn't had a really good meal in a while. So, and at that point in time, he hadn't confessed to doing anything wrong. So then we're driving back to Houston, and he says, I'll give you a confession if you get off and get me something to eat. So they pulled off the freeway, and the first restaurant they came to was the Wendy's. Is that ironic? It's kind of interesting what the things that you learn. The scene that you saw from the Discovery Channel was filmed in a small 2-bedroom house in the Heights. They blacked out the entire house. We sat in a chair in almost a tunnel-like situation. There were black on each side of us, with the camera directly pointed at us. And I'm not sure the producers on the Discovery Channel knew much about the Heights. Because every time we hear a siren or a big pickup truck, they'd have to stop production. So we thought it was going to be an hour and a half that I was going to be down there recording, and it ended up being the better part of the day. But it did, as I said, it kind of resurrected the case and got more leads back for the people here to follow up on, which I think eventually led to his capture. I guess my final statement is there's so many people, so many of my friends from Wynwood Presbyterian Church that helped me through this. Pat prayed with us constantly. Reach out to people. If you have a tragedy in your life, reach out to people. Lay it at the foot of the cross. Turn it over to God, because you're not going to be able to handle all the tragedies in your life. But believe in your faith. So that's hopefully the message that I will impart. Yeah, Paul. Yeah, because of the overcrowding condition, I don't know. I guess that still exists in TDCJ. He will be eligible for parole when he serves 50% of his sentence. On 2 occasions, Texas may be one of the few states which has a victims assistance unit in Austin. And they call me up every once in a while to see how I'm doing. And they suggested that I talk to members of the parole board. And I did that on 2 different occasions, Paul, because they changed, they're appointed by the governor. And they said, Paul, with this kind of crime, we wouldn't even listen to the case in 20 years. He said, we might listen to it in 25 to 30. I'd love it if God would keep me here that long, but I think he's going to call me home and I'm ready to go. So my daughter will have to deal with that, and I think she will just let it go. I think he's still very capable of farming. Like I said, I've gotten periodic reports from TDCJ as to his progress, and for a while he was making steps. I guess there's statuses that you get in the prison system to become a trustee. He wasn't even close to being a trustee. He was up to a 7 level, and you have to be 5 to get trustees or something. And he got to 6, and he did something, so he got knocked back there. So then after a while, I quit checking on him.
Well, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Yes, sir.
Being a father of daughters myself, and having listened to your story about your daughter, quite honestly, I'm in shock. It ravels me deep down in my soul. So I can certainly see where God has ministered to you through all of this.
Thank you, Larry.
And I applaud you because I'll go back there. I'll go back to this.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you to continue to discuss this to as many people that can hear it and share, as you have with us, what God has done for you and your walk through all this. But I will ask you this, the book that you've got coming out, is this included in your book?
Oh, yeah, it's much more detailed about her. I've been very little about my background that I shared with you today. As a matter of fact, I think I got a proof copy of the book here. It's a quick read, Larry. You could probably get through it in 2 hours. It's about 60 pages. One other thing I would like to mention, and I'm not slamming any church or any organization. My wife and I went through Grief Share at Wynwood, and it's an excellent program. My daughter benefited from it very much. She continued on to assist with Grief Share at Wynwood. We felt because of the nature of the crime that it got us a little bit down the road, but there's an organization in Houston called Parents of Murdered Children. And it's a wonderful organization. It's somewhat faith-based, but it's more just good advice from the parents who've had a child murdered. Tells you what to expect in court. We were told if we take the case to court, Wendy would be slammed. She would be called a cougar. She would be called a slut because of the age difference between her and her boyfriend. But the other thing that we learned by going there is that in a way we were lucky. We had a suspect from day one. We had a pretty good idea of where he was. There were people at Parents of Murdered Children who didn't have a single clue. The police didn't have a single clue as to what happened to their son or daughter. There was no likelihood that they would ever identify who was involved in the killing, so they would never get closure. And I feel very, very sorry for those. Closure for us came slowly, but it's kind of come. And I just think we need to pray about that, Larry. I appreciate your kind words, and if anybody in the audience thinks this would be an appropriate material for use, and any organization that you belong to, please come and talk to me afterwards, and we'll see if we can arrange something. I think Paul has said, and maybe I've said it already, the book does come out this Sunday on Amazon.com, and it's Choosing Forgiveness by Paul Marshall. There are several other Choosing Forgivenesses that are on Amazon.com. If you'd like to, pick up a copy of it. I think it's, because it's such a small book, it's, I think the introductory offer is $4. The ebook is maybe $3. If you want to get a copy of it and review it and comment on it through Amazon, that would be beneficial. So, any other questions? Any other comments? Thank you very much.